Welcome to the first episode of I Heart Gaming. Thank you so far for committing 8 seconds of your listening time to this so far. Now, let's get started. Support us. Act 1, get ready to enter gaming's biggest hallway joke ever. Spencer! Spencer's my roommate. He lives with me, and every now and then we play video games together. So, just from novice, amateur game player, let's see what his opinions are, or if he's ever heard this. Come on in. Alright, come here. Okay, so this is the microphone. Speak into it. What does
no shit, Sherlock?
What does RPG mean to you?
Rocket the code your name.
All right. Have you ever heard of any game called an RPG before?
Yeah.
All right. So what do you think that means?
I think of like those people do the LARPing or whatever.
Okay. Live action role playing.
Yeah, like role play kind of crap.
All right. What does Final Fantasy mean to you?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing.
Now, can you describe to me what a hallway is? You work in safety. You see a lot of these. What are they?
It's a thing that connects 2 rooms or more.
Okay. I'm going to show you a map of this game. And I just want you to tell me if these are hallways. So this is where you first start at the beginning of the game. You see this?
Yeah, I see it.
All right. So this is in Japanese. It says the first 2 hours. So you start right here. Does this look like a hallway?
I mean, it's straight line, yeah.
Is this a hallway?
Looks like the developers were very lazy.
Okay. So let's go an hour or 2 down. So this is after the first chapter. Is this a hallway?
I mean, yeah, it's straight line.
This is chapter 2. Is it curves? Hallways curve sometimes. Are these hallways?
So they molded after a river or a stream. It's meandering, but yeah, I guess it's a hallway.
This is the first 5 chapters of the game.
Okay.
You just walk down the line. Right here, you can kind of go from one point to the other and just skip this other hallway. Mm-hmm. But you jump right into another one. And this is a map of the first part right here. This is the chapter. Are these hallways ADA compliant?
I don't know. You played the game. You're the most disabled one here. So, did you make it through the game?
It took me 120 hours, but I did. And just last question: would you ever play any Final Fantasy game?
Oh, probably not. No.
Okay. You're a loser. All right, we're good. We will be discussing spoilers. I recommend listening at your own free will. We will talk a lot about the lore of this world and what this game set out to do and what it didn't. I'll get this out of the way now. If you're a fan of RPGs and you haven't played this game, I think you'll like this game a lot. If you haven't revisited this game since its release, now that you're away from the zeitgeist of the moment in which it was released, I think it's a good time to take a look back at it. That being said, let's head straight down the hallway that is Cocoon. For the sake of simplicity, Final Fantasy XIII has some specific terms. Let's get those out of the way right now. There is a god in this game. He created humans and fal'Cie. fal'Cie are like demigods with the ability to weaponize humans as they seem fit with a focus. These humans that have been weaponized are called legacies. The focus is the mission that specific legacy has to do. When humans become legacy, they are greeted with a vision, and that vision will give them a hint of what their focus needs to be. If a legacy fails their focus, they get turned into a monster. If they complete it, then they get turned into a crystal. And if they fail along the way, they die. Just keep that in mind throughout the rest of this podcast. Act 2.
The Hypening.
Let's take a time machine to December 17th, 2009. Back in 2009, I was applying for college and learning that you should always get help applying for colleges so you don't accidentally sign into something you're not supposed to, like a speech class for whatever reason you didn't need. I had just graduated from high school. I spent most of my gaming time playing Warhawk of all things. It was one of my favorite games to play all the time, which is whenever I had a chance, me and my little nephew would boot it up and we would just play Warhawk days on end until 3 in the morning. Japan got Final Fantasy XIII in December of 2009. Final Fantasy Worldwide fans wouldn't get it till later. Us Americans would have to wait until March 2010 for the Final Fantasy XIII to release. Spring is about to start, and this game drops on the same day as Barbie in A Mermaid Tale.
Barbie makes a big splash in A Mermaid Tale.
Barbie didn't even stand a chance. Prior to the release, Final Fantasy XIII received favorable reviews. In Japanese game media, it was praised and was voted as the second best game in the 2009 Dengeki Online Reader Poll, and in January 2010 was voted best game ever in the Famitsu Reader Poll. Famitsu gave the game 39 out of 40, calling it almost perfect. So how did the game that gets made fun of as the hallway simulator get such high praises and scores while being lambasted as a waste of time? And that's just one word.
And that is hype.
And this is how all of this happens. It's not impossible to assume that Japanese reviewers gave American game journalism expectations for how the game should be received. So mismanaged and perceived expectations are once the game is out is one thing. What about before the actual game release? Let's travel back to E3 2006.
Get hype, son.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Kaz Harai.
PlayStation 3 is meant to be the companion device in your living room, flexible enough to sustain many years of technological advancements.
This was the most WTF E3. I will call this the E3 of unrealistic expectations.
Get your hype levels up right now.
We're going to go through some of the
Hideo
highlights.
Kojima of Konami. The video you're about to see is already running on the PlayStation 3 development system. The concept of this title is simply put, sense.
So this was a really big reveal. It was Metal Gear Solid 4.
私たちは新生フォックスハウンドよ。
The PS3, the OG 20GB, 60GB model gets
Today,
announced.
we're pleased to announce the global PlayStation 3 launch details. We will make PlayStation 3 available via a 2 configuration plan, one with a 60GB hard drive disk and the other with a 20GB hard drive. In North America, the PlayStation 3 will be available at retail on November 17th, 2006. The 20GB PlayStation 3 will retail for $499 US and 549 Canadian dollars. And the 60GB PlayStation 3 for $599 US, 650 $499 US and 549 Canadian dollars. And the 60GB PlayStation 3 for $599 US, $659 Canadian. $499 US and 549 Canadian dollars. And the 60GB PlayStation 3 for $599 US, $659
It has,
Canadian.
well, the 20GB has wired controllers, a wired Ethernet, it cannot be wireless. It does have an HDMI, and it doesn't have any chrome lettering. The other thing that's very awesome about this is that they got rid of the boomerang controller. If you didn't know, prior to this E3 release, concepts of the PS3 showed a very insane looking boomerang controller. Sahz gets to play Ridge Racer on his PSP, and you get the famous Ridge Racer meme.
Okay, make sure everybody can see. Okay, so we're navigating through the cross-media bar right now. So let me go to game and to the memory stick. Okay, there's a PlayStation icon right there.
So he's loading up the PSP, and as the PSP is loading up, it's gonna boot up the PS1 game Ridge Racer, and this is where the infamous Ridge Racer meme comes out. And the funny thing about this is just that like, once again, looking at it from over here, this was back in 2006, this actual feature was a little bit ahead of its time.
I don't know if you remember this particular opening. This was actually on the original PlayStation game as well when it was loading the game. Of course, I'm not a very good player even there. Game is powered by Namco. It's Ridge Racer. Ridge Racer. Remember that one? All right, so let me go right ahead, get right into the game. Oh, this brings back memories. I don't know if it's just me, but here we go. Go! All right. Whoa.
Warhawk, one of the best games ever in my opinion, gets announced.
Warhawk from Incognito, and here to demonstrate it for us is Dylan Job, the director and producer of Warhawk for PlayStation 3. Dylan.
So what the Warhawk game was supposed to demonstrate was basically how the motion control of the PS3 worked. Originally, when the PS3 was released, it was a big deal that it had motion controls.
Hoping for the PlayStation 3, and it marks an interesting moment for us because it allows us to change from static control mechanics to very kinetic control mechanics. And as a developer and a gamer, I'm incredibly excited about this possibility.
Dylan, thank you very much indeed for sharing your game. That's great.
Final Fantasy XIII and a sequel gets announced.
We're excited to give you a sneak peek at the latest development from a company known all across the globe as a great storyteller in the role-playing game category. A company whose leading franchise, Final Fantasy, has helped define the PlayStation experience in the 1990s. Take a look at Final Fantasy XIII on PlayStation 3, which will become available in multiple versions, including Final Fantasy XIII and Final Fantasy Versus 13.
So this is interesting right here. It's a tech demo of what Final Fantasy XIII was going to be, some of the concepts. This was back in 2006, and the game was released 3 years later, so stuff clearly changed, such as like some of the uniforms. You see Lightning using her anti-gravity device, beating up some soldiers. Her model looks a little bit different than what the end-up model used to be. The biggest key difference is like some of the lighting and textures, and you can see the hanging edge in the background. And this is crazy because this is a scene from actually like way later in the game, but she's using a fighting system that never got implemented into the game, using like time stop, anti-gravity, all this other stuff, shooting her pistol like crazy. Looks like something out of a Kingdom Hearts game, but with a Final Fantasy skin. And this next scene right here where she goes walking through the forest is a scene that Lightning herself never actually goes into. It's Vanille that goes into it. But it is interesting looking at this with from the future, like so displaced from when this was released, and seeing what actually made it into the game and what didn't. And there's also talk of Fabula Nova Crystales, which, if you didn't know, was the theme tying together Final Fantasy XIII, Final Fantasy Versus 13, and a different game called Final Fantasy Agito XIII, and more on that later. This E3, looking at it in retrospect, just seems very somewhat off-putting and insane. Act 3, Fabula what? Nova what? So after E3 2006 and around that time, Fabula Nova Crystales was announced. This was the name given to the so-called saga that would eventually be Final Fantasy XIII, Final Fantasy Versus 13, and Final Fantasy Agito XIII. Originally this became Final Fantasy XIII, which did come to completion. Final Fantasy Type 0, which was Final Fantasy Agito XIII, and that got completed as Final Fantasy Type 0, but was released at first exclusively on the PSP, and then eventually made its way to Xbox One and PS4 as a remaster. And Final Fantasy Type 0 was also a rated MA game, which I believe is the first Final Fantasy title to receive that rating. And Final Fantasy 15 is what eventually became of Final Fantasy Versus 13 around 2014. I can't remember if it was 2014 or 2014. They showed the logo of Versus 13 and it broke and it became Final Fantasy 15. It was very cool though. And around this time you can actually see the exact moment where Square Enix went from dipping its toe into expanded universes and actually jumping off a 50-foot high diving board and belly flopping into it. Because with Final Fantasy 15, let's take a quick history of some other sagas, if you will call them that Square Enix tried to do. So Fabula Nova Crystallis is probably the most recent one. But it wasn't the first compilation of themes and games. Fabula Nova's themes had to do with crystals and religion. Final Fantasy XIII has a full-fledged religion, and becoming crystal is pivotal to the point of the mythos, the game, if you will. You still see this in Type 0, where countries fight over crystals and acknowledge some of the same gods. So one of the goddesses on the actual cover of Final Fantasy 15, if you take a look at it right here, that was Etro originally, which was a goddess in Final Fantasy 13, the 13th saga, and I believe she's mentioned in Type 0 as well. And I haven't really played 15, so I don't know if the thing on the cover is the same thing as it originally was, seeing as how the production of that game changed so drastically. Or I don't know if the character was replaced. After looking a little bit into some of the story, some of the wikis, it seems that she's mentioned, I think, once, but I'm not 100% sure. Compilation of Final Fantasy VII was announced in 2003. This included a few main titles and some mobile games. Dirge of Cerberus was one of them. It's a third-person shooter spin-off featuring Vincent Valentine. He was an optional character from the original Final Fantasy VII on the PS1, and his game takes place after the movie. And more on the movie later. Crisis Core is a prequel to Final Fantasy VII featuring Zack. Zack was a side character in the main game who was pivotal to the plot and had great importance, but it is very interesting that it's a prequel to the whole Final Fantasy VII game based on a side character. Before Crisis, which was another game that revealed very important plot points, is a mobile game where you play as Turks, and that one jumps all over the timeline. And then the compilation also had the movie Advent Children, which was very awesome. Get the complete collection. It's way better than the original DVD. The original DVD, the complete collection is like 20 minutes longer than the DVD. Has additional scenes, updated graphics. Very, very cool the way it was done. It also comes with 2 OVAs. And Final Fantasy VII is currently being remade. There's a lot of love being poured into Final Fantasy VII. With Final Fantasy VII being remade, though, at the time of this recording, I don't know if it's going to include any of the other character spin-offs or storylines from the other games. Dirge of Cerberus had Deep Ground, and Crisis Core kind of touched on that a little bit in the secret ending. So, once again, I don't know if how deep they're going to go into that. Another collection of games that they had was called the Avlis Alliance, and that was announced in 2006. This one was weird because the biggest main title for this game is Final Fantasy XII, which was released in 2006. However, it takes place in Avlis, which is the same world as Final Fantasy Tactics, and Tactics was released back in 1997. So it's a little bit different compared to the other ones in this game, but it's still the same themes, concepts, same world for the most part. it does get an official sequel a la Kingdom Hearts style on the DS, and that one is called Revenant Wings, and that was released in the fall of 2007. Another one that has like its own theme of games is Final Fantasy IV, which got a sequel, The After Years, and kind of like a pre-sequel, which kind of details some of the events that happens in the After Years, and I mean before the After Years, but after the game, and that was released on a PSP in 2011. Now, don't get upset. I don't know much about this one actually. No disrespect to Final Fantasy IV fans, but I never played that game. But hey, you got a sequel. Good job, buddy. And then Final Fantasy XV was released in 2016, which has 3 episodes of DLC going into the second year and is likely going to get more. They announced that they want to keep more episodes going on until 2019. There is an episode for each one of the party members. There's also a meaty online campaign that actually intertwines well with the story called Comrades, and it takes place during a time window in the game. And it was officially announced that they're going to get more episodes all the way into 2019. You can argue that all these changes made to Fabula Nova Crystallis were for the best, because it caused these games to make it to release, make it to completion. Final Fantasy XIII lost so much of its popularity after it was released due to the harsh rejection of it in the West. And then the sequels didn't help out better. And then one can make the argument that had they kept the Roman numerals XIII, then they would have underperformed, and Square Enix could have had ramifications in the way of canceling whatever projects there were. I hope I got those Roman numerals correct. Act 4, The Development. Announced at a Rocky 3 with unrealistic expectations, with a thoroughly planned out but not really shared universe, dropping some of that, 2 original spin-offs that still came out with different titles, we have to ask ourselves, what happened? Development began in 2004, and the game was intended to be released for the PS2. The codename for the project was originally Color Worlds. We have to drop some important names, so pay attention, Kappa. Also, forgive me if I mispronounce these names. I don't know much about them, but they, alongside the rest of the crew, were very pivotal towards the game's creation. Mr. Japanese Man number 1, Motomo Toriyama. He was the director of the whole game and came up with the story and the crystal mythology that, alongside Mr. Japan Man number 2, Kazushige Nojima, the scenario conceptor, came up with. He was the one that brought about the ideas for the plot and how to move the story along. Mr. Japanese Man number 3, Daisuke Watanabe, the lead scenario writer. Now, this guy has done a lot of Final Fantasy and Kingdom Hearts. And last but not least, Mr. Japanese Man number 4, Yoshinori Katase, the producer for Final Fantasy XIII. And them, alongside the rest of the crew, were the ones that helped make this game and make it come into fruition. In 2005, after the Final Fantasy VII tech demo, Square thought that the move to the PS3 was clear, and then a few years later, they made the decision to go multi-platform. The 360 version had 3 discs and a maximum output of 720p versus the PS3, which was 1080p and 1 disc. This, in hindsight, was a smart move, though, because it did put the game in front of more eyes and gave it a more worldwide appeal. The game had Western and Eastern influences. This is evident by the inclusion of Sahz on his own. Like, he's a black man, has an afro, is a father. Japanese games are usually vibrant and popping, and especially with Sahz, he does have a scene where it gets very dark, where Western games usually like to be, which is realistic and dark. In Western games, the protagonist is usually a middle-aged man who doesn't want to save the world. And in Eastern games, it's usually a teenager with special powers and a very clear goal, and a lot of times in high school. Eastern games are usually pretty linear, with Western games development being a lot more open-ended. Think of something like Grand Theft Auto 5 versus Final Fantasy XIII, or even in the PS2 days, just any Final Fantasy game versus a Grand Theft Auto game. Eastern game, Kotaku has a really cool article stating that they focus tested Final Fantasy XIII with Western audiences, but by the time they focus tested it, it was a little bit too late to make any worthwhile changes. Another big thing was that the main character was meant to be strong and a beautiful woman, not a damsel in distress, and she's also a soldier. The choreography for the fights took inspiration from Advent Children. The new paradigm system, you can actually see this in the way the movements of the characters are based, how they walk around, and the actions that they take whenever a player makes a decision. The characters move around freely and around the monsters depending on what moves they are doing. Moves are also a bit more flashier this time around, a lot more intense camera work and action-oriented cutscenes. There was also a lot of cut content from this game. There have been many quotes from the game developers that they cut so much content that they could have made a second game. And they did. Well, they made two. Final Fantasy XIII was data mined, and people did find scrap DLC in the form of a incomplete 7th arc with an incomplete boss fight. This really makes you wonder what else was cut. My bet is that in Nautilus, which is the casino city or the theme park city, I really do believe that city would have eventually gotten DLC in the form of mini games and other just little gambling things. Even the staff in that city talks about how pretty soon other rides and other things, attractions are going to be coming to that city. English localization also began early to shorten the release window and even sync lips to match English voice acting, which is something that we didn't originally think was going to happen. This is part of an interview with Gama Sutra, interviewed by Christian Nutt. Oh God, that name. It helps provide some of the context for the development of the game. When asked about the game engine and the future of the Final Fantasy games on current and future consoles, Toriyama, the game director mentioned earlier, said that we have to consider the amount of time it actually took to create the game engine, which we built from scratch, as well with what additional time included. We had to decide what we could and couldn't do. Now that we have the base technology, we will be able to do more for the current generation, high-def consoles, or the next generation of consoles as well, since we have all the groundwork built. So the next time you see Final Fantasy, we might be able to pack in more of those elements that exist in the past. And I also think that a game doesn't necessarily need to have every single one of these items in the future. We can create additional downloadable content for people to add to. It doesn't have to come with the game itself. The game was released back in 2009, and this is important because this is around the time that Sony was slowly starting to release like mid-tier titles as downloadable games, so DLC wasn't out of the realm of possibility. The other thing that's really interesting is that they talk about laying down the groundwork for future works, and this was built on the Crystal Tool engines, and as far as I know, the main games that Square is currently making are built on Unreal 4, not the actual Crystal Tools, which I believe they ended up abandoning, which was part of the reason why it took such a long time for this game to be released, because there was so much work being put into the graphics engine. When asked about the audience for who the game is, Mr. Toriyama responded with, "Our goal was to create a game that would appeal to the widest amount of users and the widest audience worldwide. Of course, we created the game for Final Fantasy fans, but with every game that we create for Final Fantasy, we always want to bring in new users. So even though we want to please the core users, we also want to make sure that we bring in new fans and appeal regardless of age or nationality worldwide." And you can clearly see this in this game because you can call it hand-holding, you can call it tutorials, but they do go on up until about chapter 10, chapter 11, where the game finally lets go of you and you can do everything you wanted to. I recommend the interview as it touches upon many different aspects of the game, as well as just cursory knowledge of what was going on around the time of development. The concept of Cocoon and Gran Pulse is so weird. Cocoon is like a planetoid, and it's floating above the world of Pulse. The best way to describe it is that Cocoon is like the moon and Pulse is like Earth, except I think it's flat. I never noticed any curvature to it. The law of perspective did not apply. But not only is Cocoon mystic like that, but it's also the perfect society. It's a theocracy, a society led by church, headed by the Primarch. The game makes its setting known immediately and tells you that Cocoon is a good place and Pulse is a bad place. Everyone on Cocoon absolutely hates, no, they despise Pulse. Pulsians are heretics, and just because they were born on the wrong side of the planet. They hate Pulse so much that they do purges to get rid of them. Anyone that even has a contact with anything Pulsian in nature will be purged. Technology from Pulse is lamented on, and it is taboo to use it. Pulse fal'Cie are seen as a destroyer of worlds. The citizens, most of whom have never stepped foot on Pulse or have never actually met a person from Pulse, are ripe with hysteria. This zealotism stems from the analects of the War of Transgression. The War of Transgression is a war between Pulse and Cocoon from centuries ago. A war that culminated in Cocoon's shell being permanently damaged, which is actually what you see in that little opening, which is in the promotional art, the in-game rendering, and it's almost everywhere in what you see Cocoon, that little crack in the shell, that big opening, that came from the War of Transgression. The society works only because people have been led like sheep their whole life. The science fiction aspects of the game lend themselves to the hyper-advanced technology that society has. An example would be Lightning, who is a soldier and has anti-gravity devices in her hand to just use at free will. The fantasy aspect of this world has to do with the mysticism around the religion. The fal'Cie, the gods, and the overarching beings that govern the world and provide the rules for this place where all the humans live. There are also many unwritten rules in this world that make you wonder what compels the people in this world to keep this society going. The land below Cocoon, Pulse, is very immensely vast as well. For as big as Cocoon is, Pulse is immensely bigger. Pulse is the definition of survival of the fittest. The land doesn't take pity, and the animals will kill you if you don't pay attention. Even Pulse, by the so-called barbarian standards of Cocoon, have destroyed cities in their plains. Cocoon and Pulse are both worlds that have rich history and lore behind them. As for the music of this game, some people may not know this, but Nobuo Uematsu did not contribute to this at all. Now, who is Nobuo Uematsu? Well, I may have pronounced that name, but let's listen to some of his highlights.
You say my love is all you need.
So who actually composed the original soundtrack for this game? His name is Masashi Hamauzu. This is also the first time that I am hearing of him. The overall themes for the music in this game are actually marching band with a little bit of military music, with some notable exceptions. There is an orchestra, and there are a few songs that actually do have lyrics. We're going to list a couple of notable songs, and let us know if you've actually heard them before. This is a prelude to Final Fantasy XIII. The Promise. Saber's Edge. The Vestige. Ragnarok. Eidolons. Blinded by the Light, which is very similar to Saber's Edge. Daddy's Got the Blues. Lightning's theme. Vanille's theme. Tejan's Tower. Dust to Dust, which is one of my favorites. Miracles. Fabula Nova Cristales, which is one of my favorites again. And Born on You. The way this music was designed was that it was meant to guide the player and also soothe his or her feelings as they connected with the characters and traveled the world as everything fell apart around them. It transitions between the worlds and it carries the player's soul across battle. The only songs I personally don't like in this whole game are the Chocobo songs. Every single one of them, absolutely hate them. But in this world where it's ruled by so many laws, unnatural laws, it's the characters that matter. In the story that is Final Fantasy XIII, the gods have cursed our main characters by endowing them with new abilities but cursing their fate. When humans become legacies, if they do not complete their focus, then they will either turn to crystal, or if they fail their focus, turn into monsters, or they will die trying to complete their focus. These are the main characters as well as some of their motivating factors that we're going to list below. Lightning, the main protagonist, she has passion, is fiery, has that pink hair, wears a soldier outfit that has a skirt, a white jacket, and some kind of gravity-defying device that she only uses in like 4 or 5 cutscenes. She has a cape, a pendant, a knife, and her signature weapon is the Blaze Fire Saber, which is a sword/gun combo. Her motivating factor for defying the gods are her sister. As a peace officer of Psychum, she was part of the Sanctum, a theocracy that whom sworn enemy is Pulse. Days prior to the purge, she found out her sister received the legacy mark. Not only was it a legacy mark, but it was a legacy mark from Pulse Falsi. Her sister had just been proposed to from Snow. With the Sanctum trying to purge any and all things purged, her sister becomes attacked by the society that she is supposed to protect, the society that she is a soldier for. Her sister, Sarah, runs away with Snow. Her sister gets taken by the Sanctum, so she volunteers to be purged. She takes the purge train to the Hanging Edge, where she meets up with Sahz and finds her sister before she turns to crystal. Snow is another main protagonist. He wears a long white trench coat, a beanie thing on his head, has some blonde hair, and constantly brags about being a hero and uses his fists to fight. He is the leader of Nora, a resistance group that started off like a neighborhood watch but somehow turned radical once the purge began. They tried to defend people who were going to get killed during the purge. He proposes to Lightning's sister and gets into a heated fight when Lightning finds out. Lightning doesn't believe him when he tells her that Sarah has become a legacy. Leading the group, a child's mom starts to fight alongside them. He tries to save her amidst the fighting, but fails, and she falls to her death. This was the mom of Hope. Nora helps Snow get the vessel where he last saw Sarah, and he meets up with Sarah and Lightning and Sahz as she turns to crystal. Sahz is the black character we mentioned earlier. He's rocking a green airman jacket in Africa and has a chocobo living inside his hair. He plays a harmonica to quell the mood, and he fights using his 2 pistols. Prior to the purge, Sahz is enjoying a trip with his son Dodge. He gets separated from his son prior to the purge, and his son and Lightning's sister, Sarah, both become legacies. They become legacies because the fal'Cie at the gorge thought it was going to be attacked and appointed Dodge as a protector with the ability to sense legacy from Pulse. Dodge is taken by the Sanctum, with Sahz unable to do anything. Sahz boards the purge train when he meets Lightning. He travels with Lightning to the Pulse vestige, where he finds Sarah and Snow as well. Hope is a teenager who looks kind of like an orange Boy Scout. He wears a handkerchief around his neck and fights using a boomerang. He and his mom are caught in the quarantine of Bodom, where the Pulse vestige is discovered in Bodom. They are forced to board the purge train. After they disembark, chaos ensues. They eventually run into Nora at the hanging edge where the Sanctum is taking the vestige. Hope's mom takes up a weapon to protect her son from the Sanctum trying to kill them. While Hope disapproves, a random girl tries to lift his spirits up. Hope sees his mother die and believes that Snow is the reason she died. He ends up traveling with the girl, chasing after Snow towards the vestige. When he finds Snow, he also groups up with Lightning and Sahz as they try to save Sarah. Vanille is not from Cocoon. Vanille awoke inside the vestige alongside Fang. Both her and Fang lost their memories. They eventually went to the gorge, where they tried attacking the fal'Cie Kujata. In response, Kujata turns Sahz's son into a legacy to protect itself. They separate. Vanille eventually gets caught up in the purge, is boarded as well. Eventually, she runs into Hope and tries to help him out within the hysteria. She travels with Hope chasing after Snow until she comes back to the vestige where she woke up. By the time they catch up, Sarah is turning into crystals and she is surrounded by Snow, Lightning, and Sahz. The last character, Fang, she's from Pulse as well. Fang woke up with Vanille on the Pulse vestige in Bodom. They try attacking Kujata at the gorge and fail. Eventually, they end up separating and she reunites with Vanille later in the game. Act 5, the review. So this is going to be the part of the podcast where I might sound a bit fangirlish, not professional at all. Don't judge me. Now, to be fair, let me preface this with saying that I am not a game critic. I'm just a middle-aged Hispanic dude in Texas who has a spare PS3 in a room somewhere in Houston, a camera, and some recording equipment. I really, really like it. This game is great. I enjoy this game purely, especially in the last few chapters. A majority of my enjoyment of this game comes from the post-game content. That being said, there is a lot of heart and joy into this story. If you're heavily invested into the story, these characters, this world, and this game will bring tears to your heart. Final Fantasy XIII is the story of Lightning and friends traversing the world of Cocoon and meeting some locals. Actually, really no locals. NPCs are few and far in between. There is an explanation for this, and that is that, spoiler alert, they are on the run from their government. What does all this mean? Well, let's start with the story. There's an actual dense story here. People are involved, governments are involved, gods are involved. If you want a fun RPG where the gameplay is light fun and slow to give you a real challenge, then I honestly recommend it. I'm not saying that in a bad way. Some people, including me, hate wasting time, and for the first 40 hours, this is exactly that up until the end. However, the end is an RPG lover's wet dream. So a quick synopsis of the story. 6 humans accidentally become superhuman by chance, fate, and a series of unfortunate events. A woman trying to rescue her sister. A dad trying to rescue his son. A soon-to-be husband trying to fulfill his future wife's last words. A teenager with family issues. And 2 ladies from a forbidden land whom are persecuted when they wake up in this new, strange land. A few events early in the story tie these things together. This band of outcasts, who do not get along together, will learn to become a family and challenge their fate. As I said earlier, you can get invested into these characters. If you can get invested into these characters, then there is a treasure trove of story for you. The individual stories intertwine seamlessly. Most of the time throughout the first 10 chapters, you split up into smaller teams that help solidify those relationships. Hope being teamed up with Snow, who was the chief catalyst for his own story. Fang with Lightning, who are both strong-willed in their determination for their loved ones. Lightning with Hope. In this scenario, Lightning mentors Hope. Sahz groups with Vanille, 2 characters who just want to leave their troubles behind. One thing that I am very appreciative of is the practicality of the story. These characters start off as humans, then get their powers. The characters have practical problems. Father issues, son issues, sister issues, wedding issues, and on a human and practical level, Final Fantasy and other RPGs sometimes get caught up in their own drama and world building story. But it's a good change of pace to have characters that would have the same problems that you and me or your neighbor would have. Now back to the powers. In Final Fantasy games I played, they always felt a bit out of place. That people can just get stronger for no reason after fighting. But by becoming a lessee, the game provides a solid reason for becoming stronger, and that's a pleasure to see. As stated before, the RPG does have a very in-depth mythos, including the fallacy, the lore, the world building, lessee, etc. The best thing for me, though, is what gets started in this world in terms of lore gets expanded upon in future games. If Final Fantasy XIII is a one and done for you, then you will be pleasantly surprised that this installment does have a start to finish story that has a definitive ending. Like previous entries into this series, this is an RPG, so gameplay can be a bit slow to do basic attacks. Basic RPG tropes are brought to the table, such as waiting for an attack, using potions, leveling up, using new items and weapons, blah blah blah, saving the world. Where the game excels is the battle system. Throughout the story, before you get to Gran Pulse, the game guides you to what you need to do through a series of enemies. At no time did I feel the enemies were so OP or underpowered. I will say that the game does have about a 2-hour intro. The game will keep on introducing mechanics up until Chapter 11. The story will try to intertwine with the gameplay up until Chapter 11, where you have free reins to take as long as you want to get back to the story. That being said, the end game 13 will punish you hard if you are not properly leveled. Difficulty spikes usually occur at the end of the chapter, but feel harsher if you rush through those chapters. There are 13 chapters and getting through them isn't difficult, but these require a mastery over the paradigm system, and the game will hold your hand making sure you understand the system up until the final chapters where it becomes clutch. Those difficulty spikes for me were only as high as they were because there was a ability in the synergist or saboteur role that I didn't receive because I was rushing through fights. At first, you can get away punching through enemies, but that strategy will only take you so far. The following are the paradigm roles, and at most you can have a combination of any 3 at the same time, including the same ones. Commando, which deals heavy damage, mostly physical, but charges the chain gauge slowly. Ravager, which deals magic damage, can be elemental, and charges the chain gauge really fast, but unless paired with a commando, it will also deplete the stagger gauge just as fast. Sentinel, this is your tank. They can survive powerful attacks and can redirect attacks to save abilities. Medic can heal and potentially revive enemies. Synergist can give allies offensive or defensive buffs, and a saboteur, which can debuff enemies, or in the case of Vanille, straight up kill people. You can make paradigms like Triple Commando, Ravager Commando Medic for steady chain building, and even Healing Ravager for quick chain building. You can do Saboteur, Commando, Tank. You can do so many things. There are so many combinations, and that is where the real meat of the game is. This system makes fights extremely interesting because you have to solve the problem without just punching. Sometimes punching your way and ignoring the paradigm system will kill you even at the lowest levels of enemies. Sometimes your enemy becomes invulnerable and the only thing you can do is build your defense. Sometimes to inflict serious damage you must stagger your enemy by building the chain gauge. Some enemies may require that you inflict status ailment days before you can perform any function. Speaking of days and other types of magic, unlike other games in the series, this game doesn't actually use a magic system. Unlike the other games, your HP refills every time you enter a new battle. You don't have to worry about magic systems or passive systems while you walk around, which lets you take a breather in between battles. To go back to the buffs and debuffs, this game is by far the most useful in terms of what abilities are good and what abilities are bad. This game will let you take full advantage of the synergist and saboteur roles in doing so. It really feels like all of your abilities are working towards something. The system is so useful and flexible. Complementing the system are various weapons that can be leveled up as well. Each character can have about a total of 8 unique weapons, each with the ability to be fully upgradable to level 99. You have your tier 1 weapons, and those can be upgraded to tier 2, and lastly to tier 3 using transformational medals found in the game. Using the transformational medals is necessary to unlock the strongest weapons for each character. Accessories work similarly, but also have different criteria for a cap level. Combining unique weapons with accessories and passive paradigm role skills can create some unreasonably strong characters. And I love that. I mentioned chapter 11 earlier, and the reason for this is that when you get to Gran Pulse, you can easily farm CP to level up. It's what you need. It replaces experience points. Each character can get up to 5 levels for any of the before mentioned roles. Each character will start with 3 roles that they can excel at over the other roles for different characters, even though it is possible for every character to eventually unlock every role. When you get to Gran Pulse, your characters will have maybe 1,000 points of health, and that is about 30 to 50 hours into the game. By the time you get to the max level on your characters, they will have around 20,000 points of life. Why is this important? The stronger skill seeds of the Crystarium that are unlocked using CP become available once you set forth into chapter 11. This means that you get so much swole much later in the game compared to others in the series. And the rest of the Crystarium gets unlocked after you defeat the final boss. The difficulty spikes, but so can you, and that is a neat concept. Any little additions that you make to your Crystarium are so much stronger in this part of the game. The only real gripe I have with this format is that during the story, it does feel that you either don't get enough materials for weapons or you don't get enough money during the first 9 chapters. However, at this point in the game, your weapons can seriously ramp up leveling. Lastly, sea stones become available at this point as well, and the drops for those stones become extremely great for creating new passive abilities by combining accessories. Why I love this game so much has to do with this section. It is like an RPG lover's wet dream. I know I said that earlier. You can create new accessories and weapons by leveling them up. You can get much stronger, much faster. You can experiment with the Crystarium. You can experiment with paradigms. There are even items that make the damage cap that you can inflict from 99,999 to almost 1 million at 999,999,000. That's almost 1 million points. That's 1 point away from a million. You can manipulate so much that the combat with passive abilities that can make you faster, quicker to dodge, better summoning windows, better luck, etc. I love it. It is so much more manipulation that I've ever felt in any other RPG compared to previous Final Fantasies I played. And previous entries that I completed and played were Final Fantasy X and XII. The ones that I've played were Final Fantasy XII, Tactics, and Type 0. It's not the best spread of Final Fantasy games, but it's a fairly good spread nonetheless. The game looks great on the PS3. Voice acting is fucking A. The only real problem I have, and it could be because I'm spoiled with today's games, are the fingers. Holy crap, are the graphics on the fingers so bad. It looks like they have a lower resolution altogether. I'm not kidding. They look bad. What I love praising are the particle effects and the graphics, the ambience of certain areas like Orphan's Cradle or Brescia's Lake Frozen in Crystal. They leave me in awe. They really do. I really enjoyed the music of the village of Oreba towards the end. The fact that I can immediately associate a specific area with a town or location is a good thing, and you want that in a game. You want a game to leave an impact on you. Outside of that, this game is aging pretty well. I love the summon entrances. CGI cutscenes look straight out of a movie. In-game cutscenes look fine most of the time. Fun fact, lip animations and facial animations were redone for English voice acting. Troy Baker, they got Troy Baker in the house. And Lightning, the voice actress for Lightning, her name is Alice Hillis, and she has such a commanding voice for Lightning. I love almost the whole sound of this game. Most of the background music is great. Battle music never gets old. I really love this rendition of the battle music for this game. The Promise, which mentioned earlier, is a great song that plays during cutscenes, even if it only actually has about 30 seconds of lyrics. And the music at the end of the game will, if you connect it with the characters, will probably make you want to cry. In conclusion, this game is a good entry into the Final Fantasy series. The game understands that its battle system is complicated and that it will take you some time to master it compared to previous battle systems. This is why the tutorial is as long as it is. Because of the linearity of the exploration, the story is about as tight as you can get in a Final Fantasy game because there aren't many side quests allowing for the story to deviate. The story stands, but it can also walk. One of my biggest complaints of almost any RPG is that side quests feel so absurd because the world is usually ending, but you have time to catch this fish, or save that kid, or collect this thing and return it to that village. If you want a story heavy driven RPG, you will like this. I recommend going into this game with an open mind. As always, your time is your time and you should respect it. If you can't get into this game within the first 3 to 5 hours, then I recommend just moving on. Like, don't waste your time here. Act 6, The Learning Lessons. This game had such an intense opprobrium to its linearity that its sequel and subsequent Final Fantasy games have almost no linearity. Final Fantasy XIII 2 from the get-go doesn't really tell you where to go and nudges you in a direction, but that is about it. That game had more praise in terms of its map design and the improvements of its battle system. However, Final Fantasy XIII 2 was criticized in its story because it took a somewhat Kingdom Hearts approach to its story in the sense that you can pick and choose where you want to start your story. And if you haven't played Kingdom Hearts in a while, I recommend playing it again, and you'll probably realize that the Disney aspects of that game are actually probably the weakest aspects in terms of the story. The same issue happened in Final Fantasy XIII 3 and in Final Fantasy XV. When it comes to RPGs, I do firmly believe they have to sacrifice story and linearity for exploration. Who has time to explore and talk when the world is ending? There is a balance somewhere. I don't know where it is. I'm not a game developer. As stated earlier, how can you save the world and also have time? Like all things in life, things shouldn't be looked through a black and white lens. If you're a player who primarily plays shooters like Call of Duty, Battlefield, Overwatch, then you probably won't like this game. The skills in those games don't translate well to this game. From that perspective, it is valid to say that this is a bad game and a waste of time. Final Fantasy XIII came out at a time when RPGs were competing on who could make the longest game. Other games that came out around this time would be something like Dark Souls and Dragon Age Origins. Those are not short games. On How Long to Beat, a website that compiles how long it takes to complete a game, Final Fantasy is listed as an average of 49 to 62 hours. Yes, you go down the same corridor, but that is the same thing you do with almost every other RPG. It may not be apparent, but it's true. Final Fantasy X is about as linear as this game. Part of the reason why this game received such harsh criticism is because you can only travel back to one chapter. Most other RPGs let you go back to the overworld, and that is just not here. The ability to have a tightly directed experience means that the narrative is also very clear. Unlike other previous installments, the story in this game comes across as well thought out for the most part. Do you get your weird Japanese tropes? Yes, you do. Was this game made by a Japanese company? Yes, it was. This is the classic case of developers not being fully uniformed in their vision and players having a preconceived notion of what the game was going to be. This game is not a bad game. I can't tell you if this is a great game, but this is a good game. This is a game where developers took their time to make something that they put a lot of detail in, that they think is special, and I can't hate that. The game was in development for about 5 years. For 5 years, there were people who really cared about this game. After those 5 years, those emotions bled into people who became fans of this particular game, me being one of them. I love this game. I will continue making hallway jokes about this game because I love it. Act 7. Are you still there? Thank you, Giant Bomb, for your E3 2006 video. Kept the whole raw video in all of its cringe and glory. Also, thank you, IGN, Games Radar, and GamesDesign.org, as well as Gamasutra, for the game developer interview transcript. If you enjoyed this program, I do appreciate it. And to all the Final Fantasy XIII fans out there, you're not alone. Hopefully, this podcast has brought about some light to your focus. That's it. We'll see you next month. Shadow of the Colossus is next month. I'm currently starting to play it and editing it right now. I'm sure you will enjoy it. And farewell.